Hey everyone, thanks for coming today. My name is Mike Luckett. I'm the creative director at LR Bags, and this is Mike Newsom.
I'm the director of marketing for LR Bags.
Yeah, and
I'm Daryl Hall's partner.
yeah, and if you don't know who this guy is, what are you even doing here? No, we're very fortunate today to have John Oates sit in with us and take a few questions about songwriting process and his career and advice. And
So a couple years ago, we decided to start this podcast because we get to work with so many wonderful musicians and all different aspects of the music industry. And so we thought, well, why not share with our followers a behind-the-scenes view of what it takes to be a music maker. And it covers not just musicians and songwriting, which we're going to be talking about today, but also different aspects like engineering and producing. So we wanted to share with everybody what it's like to work at a really high level, and it's been really fun. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I love talking about songwriting, so yeah.
So first of all, before we get into songwriting, I wanted you to talk a little bit about learning guitar and playing right-handed.
Right. I am left-handed, but I started playing guitar when I was 6 years old and lived in a small town in Pennsylvania. And the only place to take music lessons was a little mom and pop music store. And I remember my mom took me in there and for my first guitar lesson. And the teacher was an elderly lady, and she, my mom said, well, he's left-handed. And she said, oh, that won't matter. So I started playing guitar right-handed, and I've never changed. So I have no idea how I would have played if I would have played left-handed, but I'm actually glad because I have more access to cool equipment this way. So.
Yeah. Do you think that makes you a little more like ambidextrous?
I'm a little bit ambidextrous. I'm am by a lot of things, but who knows?
As far as your songwriting goes, are you kind of a lyric first or a melody first? Like, what typically comes first?
I always like to say in terms of songwriting that there are no rules. I don't think of it that way. I think of it in terms of whatever it takes to get the emotion or the feeling or the vibe across. It can start with a drum beat. It can start with a title. It can start with a poem. It could start with a set of chord changes. I think that the best thing is to be totally open in terms of being receptive to inspiration on whatever level it comes to.
Yeah. How often do you write? Do you dedicate time to sit down and write?
I think I'm always thinking about writing, and I'm always thinking about the possibility of song ideas. But to me, writing seems to come like it's very similar to exercising, physical exercising. Like when you're not in shape and you don't exercise, it's kind of hard to get started. But once you get started, you feel good and you kind of keep going. It's the same with me with writing. When I'm on tour, I don't write very much, but I'm still getting ideas and jotting things down or humming things into my phone. But then when I get home and I'm not on the road, and once I start writing, it's almost like I can't stop. So it really almost, I have to put myself in a different frame of mind, I think.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up playing music out in California, the singer of our band, he would bring a song and we'd all contribute parts. And then learning about how it works in Nashville, there's a lot of co-writing, which was really foreign to me. Can you talk a little bit about co-writing and how your experience in Nashville?
Well, when I first came to Nashville in the 90s, I had been co-writing obviously with Daryl Hall for years. So for me, co-writing was a very normal thing. I didn't understand the Nashville system, especially back in the 90s and early 2000s. It was a little bit more regimented than it is now. You know, it would be like you'd show up at 9 a.m. and you'd write till noon, and you'd have lunch, and you'd come back at 1 and you'd write till 5, and everyone would go home. It seemed odd to me to do things that way. But, that's a lot of people have a lot of success doing that. Now I think the Nashville songwriting style still has a little bit of that in it, but I think people are looser and people get together, I think, in a much more informal way. It used to be most of the songwriting collaborations were done in a publishing house or in someone's office. And now I think they still do that for sure. But I think a lot of it, people get together in much more informal ways.
So I was told there's an interesting inspiration behind "She's Gone." Can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, sure. Daryl and I had just moved to New York, and we were sharing an apartment. And it was on the Upper East Side, and I never felt comfortable up there. So I always spent a lot of my time in the village and hanging around, going to late night places, clubs or whatever. And one night I was looking for something to eat at about 2 in the morning, and there was this little place called the Pink Teacup, which was a soul food restaurant on Bleecker Street. And it was one of the, believe it or not, in New York, it was one of the few places that was actually open in the middle of the night. And I was there, and this gal came walking in. It was the middle of winter, it was December, and it was freezing cold. And she had a pink tutu and cowboy boots, and we immediately started dating. Okay. Dating as a 70s euphemism for something else, but that's all right. But anyway, so I thought things were going pretty well, and asked her if she wanted to go out on New Year's Eve. She said yes, and on New Year's Eve, she never showed up. And so I picked up my guitar, and I started going, well, if she's not coming tonight, she's probably never coming. And I said, she's gone, and I wrote this little folky kind of chorus. Daryl, I played it for Daryl, and he liked it, and he sat down and actually played the riff that you hear at the beginning of that song, the riff with the common bass note with the 2 chords changing underneath. And we wrote the song literally. I really think the song took about an hour and a half to write. We wrote it as it just came out. And a lot of the imagery in that song is very kind of mundane and down to earth, but things that people could relate to. Worn as a toothbrush hanging in the stand is one line. And it just, little things that just, I think, that captured people's, that kind of people could relate to in terms of loss and kind of a universal concept of loss. And I think the best songs happen when you can take a big subject and make it very, very personal. I think making the universal, a universal idea personal is a very important aspect of connecting with songs.
Did you ever see her again?
Yeah. Oh, yes. But I got the song, and that's all I care about.
In the end, that's all that matters.
Songwriters in a lot of ways are kind of like musical prostitutes. They'll do pretty much anything to get to the results that they're looking for. Did I say that? I didn't really say that in NAMM, did I? Oats said songwriters are musical prostitutes. That could be the headline.
Yeah.
Actually, I hope it is the headline, because it's the only way anyone will actually pay attention to me. So.
Did you and Daryl always write together, or did you write separately and bring ideas to each other?
We both do everything. We both write lyrics, melodies, chords, whatever. So what we would do is we'd always get our own individual ideas, and at some point we would get together and share the ideas. And eventually we would kind of, sift through the ideas and realize that certain ones just didn't seem right for the both of us. And, he would, if he had something he really liked, but he didn't, we didn't agree that it was right for us, he'd set it aside. Maybe he'd do it as a solo project. Same with me. And eventually we'd come up with a batch of ideas that seemed to have the right feeling and that seemed to have a coherent kind of vibe to make an album with. And then we would begin to write. And sometimes we'd function, 50-50 collaboration. Sometimes it would be the person has an idea and the other person would just kind of help, maybe edit, maybe come up with an objective opinion or two. So it really ran the gamut. There's no real hard and fast rules about how it worked.
Pretty democratic, though, between the two of you.
Nothing in music is democratic. Anybody who thinks a band is democratic is dreaming. So there's always somebody driving the bus.
So a few few years ago, we were fortunate to do a handcrafted video session. We do LR Bag's handcrafted video sessions with a lot of musicians, and we did one with John, and he came in and did a version of Maneater that I just was not expecting. And then since then, I've learned that when that was written, it was actually written for like a reggae style. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I had been to Jamaica and came back from Jamaica. It was down in the village, and it was kind of, obviously when you come back to Jamaica, you have a lot of things in your head. I met this gal at a late night thing. Sounds like a theme here. And she was absolutely incredibly beautiful, and she had the foulest mouth on any human being I'd ever heard. Needless to say, that was very inspiring. And as I walked home that night, I thought to myself, man, she's the kind of girl that would chew you up and spit you out. And I went, ooh, wait a minute. And in the middle of the night, I just said, literally simple as, oh, here she comes, watch out for it, she'll chew you up. And I kind of played around with that for a while in a reggae style. And actually, I was writing at the time with Edgar Winter, and I proposed that idea to him. He didn't seem to like it, or he just didn't strike him, as something that he wanted to do. So I played it for Daryl, and Daryl said, yeah, that's great. Let's, but it was his idea to do more of a Motown feel. He thought that would be more appropriate for what he and I was doing together. But nowadays, when I do my solo shows, I do with my solo band, I play Maneater as a reggae song, and people love it. So it's kind of cool to kind of bring it back to the initial inspiration.
Yeah, you have 7 solo albums. Your latest being Arkansas. Much more roots and Americana oriented. Your solo stuff. Yeah. Do you approach writing solo stuff differently than you did with Hall & Oates, or?
I don't think the songwriting process changes very much. In fact, one thing that I was very surprised about when I began to write with a lot of other people is that there's a lot of similarity in the approach that songwriters seem to have. They all have their unique ways of getting to to getting results. But in general, I think songwriters just have a very similar style of pulling, making magic, making something from nothing, pulling ideas out of the air and somehow articulating them in a way that other people can relate to. So, no, there's no difference in the way I'm writing, whether it's rootsy or bluesy or pop, or it doesn't matter to me. The style of it does not affect the way I write.
And the inspirations, they just come from...
Well, the inspiration for the Arkansas album was completely unique, because what I did was I went back to my earliest influences, which was folk blues, Delta blues, bluegrass, things like that. That's the kind of music that I was actually playing before I met Daryl Hall. And so living in Nashville and being surrounded by so many amazing Americana and roots musicians was kind of a stimulation for me to go back into my past and rediscover something in myself that I had kind of left by the wayside. So it was really cool to do that album and be surrounded with amazing musicians like Sam Bush and Guthrie Trapp, and people who could really help me bring that music back to life.
I'm curious about something. In writing a song, is there ever a point where there's like the law of diminishing returns, where it's like, okay, I got to stop here, or else it's going to go somewhere I don't want it to go?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes I think you can outthink yourself or overthink yourself. I think the idea of if you get an initial inspiration and it's something that moves you to write the song, sometimes you can overcraft it. You can start looking at it a little too analytically. You can start overcrafting the song itself, and sometimes you get away from the actual magic that caused you to write it in the first place. So there's definitely a possibility that can happen. I think that happens a little bit more in the production record-making process, where the initial inspiration and initial magic that was the song itself can get lost as it becomes translated with other musicians and technology and things like that. So I think that's a little bit more of a danger in the production side of things.